how to make croissants. You can take normal, everyday ingredients that you may find around your house and turn them into a buttery, flaky pastry that we all love. To make these, you will need 500 grams of flour, 140 grams of water, 140 grams of whole milk, 55 grams of sugar, 40 grams of butter, 13 grams of dry yeast, 12 grams of salt, and then 350 grams of a high fat content butter. You will also need a mixing bowl, a digital scale, a rolling pin, some wax paper, and some plastic wrap. So let's get started. First, heat up some water to 140 degrees. Next, measure out 140 grams of whole milk. Then we are going to add 140 grams of our hot water to the milk. Next, because I wasn't thinking, pour it into a bowl so that we can add 10 grams of our 55 grams of sugar, and then we will add 13 grams of dry active yeast. Stir this to combine and then let sit to bloom. Then measure out 500 grams of all-purpose flour. To that we will add 12 grams of salt, 45 grams of sugar, and 40 grams of softened butter, which we will mix in to the flour first. By this point, our wet ingredients and yeast should look nice and foamy like this. If it does not look like this, your yeast has died and you should go buy some new yeast. We will then start incorporating our wet ingredients into the flour. If you have a stand mixer, enjoy it. If you don't, feel free to use your hand to mix it all together. And this will take a few minutes to get it to come together into a cohesive ball of dough. And throughout the process, your hands might get a little messy. Once the ball of dough has come together, you can take it out of the bowl, slap it on a floured surface or a counter, and you will want to knead the dough for about 15 minutes. This will help some gluten form and will toughen up the dough. This will make for flakier croissants in the end. We will then place the ball of dough back into a clean bowl and cover with a moist towel. And then pop it in your oven with the light on. This will put it at a great temperature for proofing. We'll let it proof for 1 hour or until it has doubled in size, as you can see here. We will then slap it on a floured surface and start shaping it into a square. Once your dough is in the shape of a square, we will wrap it and place it in the refrigerator. We will now take our 350 grams of softened, high fat content butter. I actually like to use the Kerrygold butter. It works very well. And we're going to use the wax paper, kind of squish it into a single blob. And then we're going to shape it out into a slab roughly about 8 inches by 8 inches. Now you can use your hands to kind of start spreading it out, and you can use the wax paper to create a form or mold that is square, and later on in the stages a rolling pin becomes very useful, as you will see here. Once you have the desired shape and thickness of your butter slab, go ahead and put that in the refrigerator to harden up. You'll want to put this slab of butter in the refrigerator for about 15 minutes just to kind of solidify. And then we'll move on to laminating. Next, you'll take your dough and butter out of the refrigerator, and you'll start working the dough out to thin it out and to get it to the proper size. Once you have it to what you feel is the right size, you can kind of pull the corners out to make sure it's nice and square. And you can use your butter slab to check the size. And if you rotate the butter slab 45 degrees to the dough, it should reach just to the edges. Once your dough is the right size, you can unwrap your butter and lay it out onto your dough. You will then fold the corners in towards the center of the butter slab to create a nice little envelope around the butter. Once you have folded all of the corners in, you want to make sure that each seam is sealed well. Once you have sealed the butter in the dough, you will want to start pressing it out with the rolling pin, starting from the middle, working towards the outside. And you'll want to start rolling it from the middle outward in a singular plane, just make it a long rectangle. Once the dough has been stretched out far enough, you will take the ends and fold it into thirds like you would a letter. Once you have completed the folding, you can either turn it 90 degrees and roll it again, or put it in the refrigerator. Here you can see I turn it 90 degrees, flour it a little bit, and then we'll roll it out a second time. If you feel any resistance from the dough, it is best to let it rest, and we like to let it rest in the refrigerator so that the butter does not get too soft. So in between folds, you will put it in the refrigerator to relax for about 20 minutes. After 3 folds, you will have the amount of layers that you will need for the croissant. And so you'll put it in the refrigerator, let it rest before final rolling. After you've let the dough rest in the refrigerator, you want to pull it out, flour on a floured surface, and you'll start rolling it out again. This time into a shape in which we will cut our croissants from. You want to make sure that the dough is 4 millimeters or 1/8 inch thick for proper sizing. Be patient with the rolling throughout every process so that you do not break the butter. Throughout the rolling process, you may decide that you have a lot of dough to work with. Feel free to take a pizza cutter and cut it in half, and then continue rolling out to the desired size. Here, I've taken half of the amount of dough to be able to roll it down to the final thickness and size. As for the size of the dough sheet, I like to make it about 25 centimeters wide and however long it needs to be to get it down to that 4 millimeter thickness. Once you have your dough to the proper thickness, you'll want to prepare 2 baking sheets with parchment paper for the proofing and baking process. I like to cut my shapes with a pizza cutter, and it is recommended to cut these at a size of 10 millimeters wide by 25 long. And here I get a visit from my son, who came to help.
What?
We built forest. We built forest.
You built a forest?
Yeah.
We later built a fort. Once you have cut your shapes out, I like to stretch the wide end a little bit, and we'll roll from that side to the point, being firm but somewhat gentle as to not press it all together. This will give us 7 distinct layers or levels. Now before proofing, we will make a simple egg wash with an egg, a little bit of water. We'll scramble that together. We will brush this egg wash on all the croissants before proofing and before baking. This will help create a nice brown, crispy surface on all the croissants. And just like the dough earlier, we're going to place these into an oven with the light turned on to proof for an hour. If you proof too long, they will actually become flat. So 1 hour. And after that hour, they should have grown in size, but probably not doubled. So pull them out, turn your oven on to 435, And while you're waiting, you can brush them down with the second coating of the egg wash. Please be gentle as they will be less dense than they were the first brushing. Once your oven is preheated to 435, pop the croissants in and then immediately turn the heat down to 400 degrees. And we're going to keep it there for 5 to 10 minutes. And then we're going to take it down again to 380 until they are finished. This is where it's going to take a little bit of work on your part to monitor them and actually figure out what works with your oven. And once they're done, pull them out, let them cool on the pan for just a minute, and then you can move them onto a wire rack. Please be careful if they are hot. I have been burned by croissants many times recently. And they will also be very delicate, so we don't want to break all those nice flaky layers. And this is what you should end up with. Some beautiful croissants that you made yourself. And feel free to eat these once they've cooled down enough to put in your mouth, because they are delicious when they are warm. They will also be nice and crispy to the touch. And if you have more than you can eat, feel free to put them in the freezer, and you can reheat them in a 350-degree oven for about 10 minutes and they will come out perfect.